Data Center 4.0, the future of the digital ecosystem. In this podcast series from DigitalCentre, data center leader, expert and APAC-based marketeer Omer Wilson will be in conversation with technology and industry experts on the future of the data center and the wider ecosystem. Today's tech-fueled transformation era is putting traditional data centers under unprecedented pressure. This pressure is coming from businesses, users and consumers from every physical, virtual and cloud-centric angle. What does the future hold for the data center? Hello and welcome to the next in the DigitalCentre podcast series. Thank you again for taking the time out of your busy schedules to join us. We hope you'll find this next installment as enjoyable as many of you have fed back to the previous ones. We're keeping to our schedule of publishing at least one of these a month, latest every 2 months. And so we're quite happy in terms of the level of content and engagement we've received today. Today we've got a slightly different format. We're going to have two guests with us. We feel there's enough happening in the digital arena to merit a double attendee, and we've got two senior attendees, executives from the sector with us. So I think it should prove to be a very engaging discussion. I'll start with Peter. We're joined by Peter van Bergel, the CEO at AMSIX, the Amsterdam Internet Exchange. And we're also joined by Mark Smith, the Managing Director for Digital Realty of Asia Pacific, based out of Singapore. So without further ado, I'd like to just ask each guest to briefly introduce themselves. Peter, if we can start with you.
Yes, thank you, Omar, and thank you for having me in this podcast. So AMSIX, the Amsterdam Internet Exchange, we are a global operator of internet exchanges with the main operation in Amsterdam, as the name suggests. But we also operate a number of internet exchanges across the world, including in Asia-Pac. I'm with the organization now for about 3 years, and like many other organizations, we go through our own transformation to deal with the changes we see in the market.
Excellent. Real honor to have you, Peter, and very much looking forward to your insights for this discussion. Mark, over to you to introduce yourself and your role and organization.
Okay, thank you, Omer. Very pleased to be on your podcast as well, and to participate with Peter. Looking forward to hearing what Peter has to say as well. As Omer said, my name is Mark Smith. I'm Managing Director of Asia Pacific for Digital Realty, based in Singapore. Digital Realty is the leading data center provider globally. We have 280 data centers around the world in 47 metros in 22 countries. So really quite a significant platform across the world as we continue to build out and meet our customer demand. We're one of the few, if not only, data center providers providing kind of a full breadth of services, everything from co-location, scale to even hyperscale. So everything from single racks all the way up to multi-megawatt deployments, and with a very strong emphasis and overlay of connectivity. So it'll be interesting to hear what Peter has to say on that front. I'll leave it for there. I'm sure we can discuss this more in detail going forward. Thank you, Omer.
Great stuff. Thanks, Mark. Great to have you both. And you're absolutely right. I think that the combination of both AMSIX and Digital Realty, so one of the leading internet exchanges in the world, and the data center operator is going to be interesting because it is the fabric of what's keeping the world connected at the moment. So with that, I think we'll go with the first question to get us going, and please feel free, both of you, to add on or feed into the response of the other person. So we keep this very much as a dialogue as we move forward. So first question, Peter, and I'm going to come to you with it, especially from your wealth of experience in your sector. Can you summarize from an AMSIX perspective and from your the ecosystem of providers you work with, how would you summarize the change in digital behaviors seen since COVID started? So going right back from February, March to today, how would you say that digital behaviors have changed? And how would you summarize the new normal from your perspective?
Yeah, I think you could say we've had a front seat to some of this change happening, given that we, of course, deal with a lot of the internet traffic. And we've seen quite the impact of the new normal. We keep on using that term. I think in general terms, we've seen an increase in internet use, of course. But also when we look at the type of traffic that increased, then undoubtedly one of the major growth areas was conferencing, right? So applications like Zoom and Teams and Skype and what have you, they really skyrocketed because most of the people, even globally, were forced to work from home with all the lockdowns going on. And we've seen exactly the same. Actually, at AMSIX, we also decided halfway through March, based on the Dutch government regulations, that everybody was working from home. So we've really seen a huge increase in the traffic related to conferencing. Therefore, we've also really seen new peaks actually in our traffic. So in December, we had a peak of more than 7 terabit per second. And in March, actually, or early April, we had a peak of 8 terabit per second. So in a matter of a quarter, it jumped more than a terabit of traffic. I think roughly what we're seeing is that internet traffic grew about 20% overall in the period from sort of halfway through March till now. And I say now because we have not really seen a drop-off. So we've seen a little bit because of the holiday season, which is typical and seasonal for traffic, but it is staying at that higher peak. Next to conferencing, we've also seen a huge increase in streaming, close to 40%. So the Netflix and Disney Plus type companies also really increased a lot, and also gaming. So I think you could conclude that both from a business sense and people working from home, that's really been an impact of the COVID crisis, but also streaming and gaming. So more on, I would say, the personal use side of the internet. So it's really been a huge increase of traffic. The good thing is we're scaled for that, so we've been able to deal with it quite easily on our platform. But it's quite rare to see a 20% increase in traffic in
Incredible.
a matter of a quarter.
Incredible. Yeah, no, those stats, and we've heard so many stats from March onwards, but for yourselves to say that it's really you're seeing the tangible internet traffic numbers, and to hear that it's also sustained, Peter, is quite interesting, that it hasn't dropped off as well.
No, not really. Like I said, it's a couple of percentages, but it's still hovering somewhere between 7.5 and 8 terabit per second. So yeah, it's really systemic, you could say. Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to have a follow-up question for you on this one, but before I do, I want to go to Mark and get your view on the digital behaviors and the impact on the data center sector, really, Mark, from what Digital Realty is doing.
Peter's comments aligns extremely well with what we're seeing out in Asia Pacific as well. It's just a real increase in internet usage, if you will, and so I can't really add much more there. It's I guess what we've heard, some people call it's been an acceleration in some of these digital trends that we've been seeing for many years now. And I like this idea of acceleration in the sense that we've done in 6 months what we were on track to do in 4 years. We've really accelerated just the adoption of digital technology and use. One way to consider it as well, as Peter mentioned, is just the whole work from home effort. And one of my surprises, at least within digital, has been just how productive and how effective our teams have been in working from home and adapting to kind of this new virtual lifestyle, if you will, in terms of, and yet productivity, I would argue, has actually increased. I've been super impressed with how well we've been able to respond and get things done. And frankly, I see that with our customers as well. It's interesting to me, Peter, that you were able to scale during the spike in activity. You were able to scale so quickly and readily. How would you? That suggests that you had been investing in this for some time, and you had the flexibility and the platform to be able to do that. But in our case, in the data center business, it's a 12 to 24 month lead time in terms of building data centers. And so, bringing inventory online doesn't just happen overnight. And so that's been an area where, there's been a lot of focus at Digital in terms of executing new capacity and bringing more inventory to market because of these increased demands. So a little bit different challenges, but I envy your ability to flex quickly to meet the demand.
But it is indeed, for a large part, is for the way we run our operations business for many years now. So we have much more capacity than we see as peak traffic. And the reason is specifically that, because the internet can, of course, be very bursty in traffic. Or there may be situations like with COVID, where there is an increased demand. So we've always been, I'm not sure if it's the right English word, but over-dimensioned and had more capacity than maybe strictly necessary. But that is to be ready for situations like this. And it also has to do, I think, with the way the internet is built and structured, right? So many companies like us have more capacity than they would absolutely need. But that is because if something happens somewhere over to the left, then somewhere over to the right, you can still reroute your traffic and deal with it. So that has been a part of it. However, I also have to commend my team. I think similar to yours or many companies that they've quite easily shifted to this working from home and virtual work. Many of the things we do in managing the platform we can do remotely, but specifically our engineers have to travel to data centers like yourself to also perform some upgrades. In the latter stages of the crisis, we are now really having to do some upgrades because for now we need to keep up with the demand. But yeah, I wouldn't say we've been lucky, but our business strategy has paid out well for this.
And that's a great follow-up question that Mark sort of focused in on, and a little bit around the scalability, Peter, to you again, based on your response to the last question, I guess, which you mentioned that 20% increase is sort of tapered off a little bit, but only a few percentage points. So from your perspective and from AMSIC's, you're planning for as much as you can plan in the current climate. It's very unpredictable times, but going into next year, as a company, do you see a lot of these is your feel that these digital behaviors are going to become normal in the main, or do you think some items will go back to as we were before, or do you think the majority will stay? If so, which parts of it do you think will stay, and which parts do you think will go back to what was the old normal, let's say?
Yeah. So we see a couple of things happening. I think maybe to start, let me take one step back. So our strategy is basically pillared on three main topics. That's to innovate, to optimize, and to grow. And those are to some extent container verbs, but we chose to go that path because we see that's necessary to keep up with the demand. So on one hand, we see the internet grow. It will continue to grow. More and more people come online. When you think of things like 5G and IoT and self-driving vehicles and all of that stuff, smart cities, the internet will grow. However, we also are hitting quite hard, actually, the limitations of the internet as it was invented 25 years ago. So we do need to also innovate and come up with new technology to actually deal with that increased demand, and more devices and people getting connected to the internet. So that's where the innovation bit goes, and we're investing in that quite heavily. But yeah, we also continue to optimize our platform and use new technologies to have a higher density on the same footprint, to be able to deal with more traffic again on that similar footprint. We're working with the data centers to also look at things like power and try and minimize the power consumption. Of course, there's a lot of technology going on around fiber and more and more capacity over the same fibers. So all of that we're following closely. but also investing in it continuously to make sure that our platform is up for another step increase if necessary, but also to do that at a ever more optimized way. And those two things then lead into our ability to continue to innovate and deal with these new demands. So, what we do think, based on all of that and what we're seeing in the market, is that things like working from home and the virtual workforce will probably stay. It was already there for many years, of course, but at the extent it is now happening, I think it'll stay, because it's not just about productivity, which I agree with Mark, but it's also about, there's no traffic jams in the Netherlands for the past 6 months. It's like if you need to get on the road to an office or somewhere. It's busy, but there's been 1 or 2 traffic jams in the past 6 months, so that's amazing. Of course there's an environmental angle to it you could bring in, etc. So I think things like that will stay, and not just because of the digitization and people becoming more digital in their services, but also there are some fallout effects, if you will, in other parts of the society and economy that will benefit from this. So yes, we agree again with Mark that acceleration of digitization and the digital transformation will remain, working from home, but also some things will go back to normal because the remote working is more productive, but it's also really transactional, and you're sort of missing the interpersonal bit. So we also believe that an element of that is going to come back, because there's no substitute for being in the same room and having a chat, depending on the topic, of course. So we do expect some of that to come back, so a bit more travel. And finally, sorry for the somewhat long-winded answer, but the other thing we think will remain is less business travel, right? So I think we've proven to all that we were traveling quite easily because it was cheap, it was efficient and easy to do. And I think we're now learning that a lot of this can be done remotely and through video conferencing. So we, at least at Om6, are very conscious about the travel we do. We're not going to travel for the next 6 months at least, given the COVID virus. But after that, we are all already thinking about how can we mix and match the virtual with physical and travel less and do more things virtually. So that's where there are 2 or 3 things where we think change will happen, or things will actually remain the same as it.
Omer, I was going to touch on something Peter was talking about, this idea of virtual versus physical, or the combination as we go forward. And it's interesting. At Digital, we've started offering virtual data center tours of our data centers all around the world. And we're finding that is kind of maybe a good example whereby a salesperson would spend a day to go with a prospective customer to tour a data center physically before, whereas today, they can put in 2, 3, 4 virtual tours of those data centers with many different prospective customers. So we see productivity just as that is one example going right up. And frankly, I think from a customer point of view or prospective customer point of view, the experience is even better. And I think we're seeing examples like this over and over again in terms of how, I don't know, the good thing about COVID, if we could focus on a few good things, is that it's really kind of pushed us to all think laterally, if you will, in terms of how more can be done virtually. And I frankly don't think in many cases we're going to go back to the way it was. Business travel is a perfect example Peter gave.
Yeah, we maybe to add to that too, Mark, we are actually running our own digital transformation internally. And when we launched it, we sort of demanded that it would be done on site. We would have the integration, the design team on site together with our external partner. And through COVID, we cannot. We're now doing everything virtually, and we're still on time, on budget, and it's all done virtually. So it's a good example again of if you're pressured, typically the innovative or the creative answers come, and in many cases they're actually better. I agree. Yeah.
Very, very true. It sometimes and sort of ties both your point, Mark, and yours, Peter. It takes something like COVID to drive some of this change that when things are going as normal, it may not change for a much longer time. So that acceleration, I think, is certainly being seen across industries. So Mark, back to you. Sort of tying again to the secondary question I posed to Peter, and you mentioned the data center as industries. The requirement to really be prepared in advance, which is not easy for the sector. But can you comment from a APAC data center sector, digital realty perspective? Also, one, how has the demand been like from the customer standpoint through this COVID period, and then any specific markets in APAC that you want to focus on in terms of where that growth is being seen, especially more focused than others?
Sure. As we've kind of discussed, the acceleration of digitization, is very much with us. And so we're seeing that in the data center space clearly. I describe it as the intensity of demand has increased, if you will. We have been growing quite significantly in Asia Pacific. In fact, by next year, 2021, Asia Pacific as a market is at current growth rates is meant to become the largest market in the world, larger than North America, for data center services. And so we're seeing really a lot of growth. Both the base size of the market is now very large, and the rate of growth is much higher than we're seeing elsewhere in the world, although that's growing as well. So that's kind of one. In terms of markets, it's really interesting. We're seeing markets that are particularly hot, particularly a lot of interest is where they're highly connected markets. That could be Singapore, that could be Hong Kong, that could be Tokyo, that could be Sydney. These highly connected tier one, if you will, very technically savvy, very high in the cloud readiness index markets where we're seeing very large data center absorption rates. And that really very much covers Asia Pacific. I throw in, these markets like South Korea, which are technically very sophisticated. They're really leading in terms of rolling out some of these new technologies that I'm sure we'll talk to in a moment, but things like 5G, IoT, AI is really having, these are key drivers in terms of future growth for the data center industry, I think.
Excellent. Thanks, Mark. No, I think the APAC growth is without a doubt one of the key trends of the current COVID piece as well, given that the lockdowns obviously started much earlier than other parts of the world. That sustained growth and usage that Peter talked about is going to be a forebearer, I think, in Asia. It's going to be interesting to see how the Chinese, Korean, Japanese and, those trends, and they don't appear to be going back to any form of old normal, as we've commented on themselves. So that growth in digitization looks like it's going to continue for sure. So Mark alluded to it there, and I think it'll be an interesting place to take the discussion now is, I know people, especially with the DigitalCentre, we're always about, the future and with the ecosystem of partners we have to try and look to what's next for the listening and the members that join the site. So Peter, with that from an internet exchange and AMSIC's perspective, we mentioned how you're obviously coping with the current demand very well. So you've obviously pre-built in a lot of growth capacity. But what sort of, if you had to, what you're able to share, but for future horizon in terms of tech, what's coming down the line for AMSICs and internet exchanges in general? Is there more AI on the cards? How will 5G impact yourselves? And how will IoT impact yourselves? So a few big questions there, but hopefully you can summarize some of your thoughts.
I was going to say, do we have minutes or hours? No. I think the short answer is it's all going to impact us because ultimately it's going to have an impact on connectivity and interconnectivity. And some of the I sometimes say some of the tragedy of the internet exchange, and to some extent the data center, is that it's all happening behind the wall board, right? So for a user, you see your phone or your app or your laptop screen. That's where it happens. But for all of those elements of functionality to come to you as a user, you need to have good connectivity, and a lot of that is also happening, of course, within the data center. So, we sort of look at this in, you could argue, internet exchanges are going into sort of a third life phase. So the initial phase when the internet came about was about networks interconnecting and sharing data across those networks to their users. In the second phase, we saw the rise, if you will, of the content, so the Facebooks and the YouTubes and the what have you. And I think now, sort of in the third phase, we're seeing a lot of that digital transformation come about, where we see more and more companies understanding they need to really take care of their connectivity, but they also really need to start to think about where they put their data and how they want to use their data, and whether or not they need to move it around, or if they just need to consume it or make it available to others to consume and actually do something with it. And I think that also plays into things like the discussion around, do you need a core data center or an edge data center? Or, we think of self-driving cars and 5G or IoT. Does all that data have to sit in a large data center somewhere centrally, or is it just data that is kept locally and just consumed between two apps or two phones or two devices or a mix of that? So that's where we believe the market is going. That's where we believe also as an internet exchange, we need to start develop solutions and technology with partners, of course, to be able to basically deal with that hyper connectivity, if you will, but really build in the intelligence, and that's where maybe AI comes into play, to be able to switch between that edge and core and really figure out how to deal with this massive amounts of data that sit in the cloud or in data centers, right? I mean, we talk about cloud and data center as something separate, but of course, ultimately, technically, they cannot be in the same building. And we're really focusing on how can we offer services that actually help intuitively, but also reliably and safely interconnect all of that core edge, IoT type demand. I hope that gives a little bit of an answer. It's somewhat high level, but it's also, that's where we again see where connectivity is going. It's much more driven by the application than it is just by moving data around. And that's where we're basically going as an internet exchange ourselves.
Very interesting. No, so it certainly gives an excellent overview. And there's a few points there that I'll come back to, but I think the interlink to data centers is perfect there. So Mark, similar question and thoughts for you around from a DC industry and also anything digital is doing in terms of preparing for the future, both in terms of maybe locations, the types of data centers being built, or even the technology or the interconnectivity, I guess, between them from a networks perspective would be interesting.
Sure. Well, I'll just keep going where Peter kind of left off, because Peter framed it perfectly. The way in which, so we're seeing an explosion of data, whether it's through IoT or 5G as it gets rolled out, it's that's just clearly that trend's gonna continue. And the question becomes, how are enterprises or applications going to consume this data, and how is it needed? And we've termed a term data gravity, the sense being, you get these massive data lakes or data oceans, and that creates, you can't necessarily move this data around very easily, and that creates its own gravity, if you will. In which case, do these applications need to be close to these data lakes in order to consume that information, or do they need to be more at the edge, closer to where that data is being created? And so that creates a lot of very interesting scenarios in terms of where best to place your applications and your compute and your analytics and your big, AI engines, if you will, to drive that data. It has a real impact on us in the data center industry because for several reasons. You mentioned connectivity, but I'll jump through that real quick, and around just power density. These GPUs and these AI servers, if you will, require a significantly higher amount of power per rack, if you will. historically or even to date, you'd get your standard enterprise applications or enterprise requirements in a rack, and it'd be like 3 to 4 kilowatts per rack. Whereas for these GPUs and these high-end AI racks, we're talking 15 plus kilowatts per rack. So that's, 5 times nearly more, in terms of just plain power density that's required. And so that's driving us to really rethink, our design and how we can meet those, the increasing power requirements of our customers. And it definitely has an impact on design, for the data center. Equally, and very much related, actually, due to the demands of our customers and frankly governments, and we haven't touched on it too much, but is the very, very strong increasing desire for renewable and sustainable access to energy that is consistent, reliable, that can be used on a 24/7 day week, but is green, and such that that's becoming so you've kind of got two situations here where the need for increasing power and power density, while at the same time real search for renewables and sustainable energy sources is becoming increasingly important to our customers. So it's really changing the dynamic for us.
Yeah, if I may add to that, I think you've got an excellent point there, Mark, in that ultimately we need to look at this in an integrated fashion, right? Because you're right, the power demands are enormous. And specifically in Amsterdam and the Amsterdam region, we were ahead for a long time, but now we're really starting to basically suffer some of those consequences, given that all the data centers together are using the same amount of power as the whole city of Amsterdam. Just as a comparison or to underwrite what you said about these new type of apps and AI type machines eating that power. But there's also some sort of a symbiosis between the connectivity and the data center, or if you will, between AMP6 and a party like DRT, in that there's no use to putting a data center in the middle of a field but have green energy if it's not connected. And there's no use to build a connection point if there's no data centers that hook up to it. So we really need solutions, not just us as technology partners to work out, but also work with governments to have this integrated approach in view that we can both have good digitization and help the economies with that and help the companies with it, but also deal with the more environmental question and do we dig up the ground 5 times or do it once? Have good power lines, but also good connectivity, and maybe even other things in play. So I think that's what's important for all of us to realize, that it's no longer the data center business or the connectivity business or the energy business. All of it is becoming intertwined and depending on each other.
Yeah, Peter, couldn't agree more.
Excellent point. Good to have agreement as well. Always helpful. But it goes to show the ecosystem. Benefit and and it's great, especially in this forum, because that's exactly what the aim of DigitalCentre really was at the start, was to bring along with operators, cloud operators, and software as a service, supercomputing providers. All together, exactly as Peter you said, which is now an ecosystem of solutions that customers need. So Mark brought us sustainability, which is a huge topic. I want to bring up another one as we approach sort of the last 10 minutes or so of our allotted time, Peter, and that's security. And I think digitization and increased digitization from COVID has increased people working from home, people shopping online, and people consuming entertainment online. All trends that were not started by COVID. I think we're very much agreed, but clearly accelerated, and probably to the point of really no return now, if we're honest, in terms of how people are, especially the new generations. Even if we consider e-gaming is starting to eclipse traditional physical gaming. So it's going to be a unique world we go into. But with that, obviously, there comes risks. If you look at any of the reports and analysis, unfortunately, credit card fraud, banking attacks, cyber attacks on energy systems, which is really serious within some countries, is all trending upwards. Again, not something new. This didn't start with COVID, but as more people are online, it's unfortunately inevitable that the attackers increase also. I'd be interested from both your perspectives, because it is slightly different, obviously, from the sectors and the industries you're in, and as a company, what part of the security you're responsible for, physical versus, logical. But I'd be very interested to get a feel for your general feel about the cyber security situation, and then maybe as an industry, and if you feel relevant as a company, what you're doing to help your customers in that regard. So Peter, if we could start with you and your thoughts, would be great.
Yeah, unfortunately, I can only agree that all the trends as it relates to cybercrime are in the wrong direction, right? Everything is going sort of up to the top right corner, and that's not good. And a lot of companies and a lot of investments are being made in trying to make things more secure. But to some extent, it's also a bit of an arms race, of course, with criminals. And actually, more and more, we also learn about nation states using the internet to try and exert pressure or power, influence. There's a couple of things. One, I think, on the one hand, the internet may be one of the best inventions ever, given it's provided billions of people the opportunity to learn and have access to information, and in a sort of open, neutral way communicate with each other. But that open and neutral way of doing things is now starting to work against us quite rapidly with the security threats and the fraud happening. So I think a couple of things. One, there is an element of regulation. So in Europe, for example, we have GDPR, which on the one hand is a consultant's dream, but it's also the law in and of itself is actually aimed at the right thing. It's about the right to be forgotten, and there is now law in place that actually helps drive the privacy and enforce privacy actually for individuals and companies. But of course, the technology is lagging behind for many companies to do that. But I think that's a start to say, right, how do we as a society want to deal with things like privacy, and how do we try and enforce that also through technology? So that's one. The other thing is, though, if you look at it from another angle, many people basically look at the internet as a utility by now, similar to gas and water and etc. But if I open the tap, specifically across Europe, if I open the tap, I can safely drink the water. And if I put my laptop or my phone or whatever, my charger in the socket, right, I can safely take power. However, if I hook up to the internet, all of a sudden I myself am responsible for antivirus, anti-spam. I really need to be cautious of clicking on any link, etc. So there's a lot of stuff I need to do myself, which maybe should be taken care of within the internet. And I think that's where the challenge is, right? How far can we as internet society, whether it's us as an IX or a data center or an app provider, actually safeguard the user, and how much does the user have to do themselves? At AMSIX, because we're focused on the connectivity layer and we're not dealing with the application layer ourselves, we are really focused on hardening the network and trying to prevent, of course, criminals or anybody to break into the network and steal data or hijack data. So that's really where our efforts are going. But we also, of course, adhere very much to all the security rules and sets that companies like TRT have, because our equipment actually sits in a data center. So to some extent, we rely on the data center to keep our equipment safe. But of course, we also then need to adhere to the rules and make sure we're not breaking them themselves. So, our focus is technically on the network and on the connectivity, but more from where do we think it should go. I think there could be more effort put into trying to make the internet a safer place. But again, it's gonna be a lot of companies working together to make that happen. So it's not easy, but I think we have to, because if we're not careful, we're going to lose that battle and live in a very dangerous place. I'll stop there. I can go on for hours, but I'll.
Excellent outline, and within the time you had, and a great handover, Mark. I thought to yourself and the physical side of the world, in terms of how data centers and digital approach, securing these internet locations where all our data goes through. For your comment.
Well, I would love to talk to Peter for another hour about this, because I think he's got some really interesting views. This idea that data privacy is a personal right, is a human right, I think is an extremely important subject, and something that I know we're all going to be talking about increasingly over the years. No question. I mean, the internet, as Peter suggested, it has become an essential service. And so as such, there's clearly a responsibility of the industry to provide a secure and safe environment. On the digital side, it's a little bit more straightforward. One way I like to describe, our data centers is, the cloud lives within our four walls. It's very much a physical infrastructure, if you will. So we're very focused on the physical security of our customers' equipment and of the facilities. And so that's secure perimeters, secure authorization in terms of access, ensuring that our network is physically not connected to any other, whether it be customer or otherwise networks. So a real physical distance there, and I guess a real focus on that physical security. Going into the actual cybersecurity, et cetera, isn't an area that we typically focus on. So it's a little more straightforward from our point of view. Things like ensuring that we've got very accurate logs and CCTV systems to ensure that people are going where they need to go, et cetera, is very much in something that we log and we make available to our customers. So, frankly, a little bit more straightforward from a digital realty point of view on the security front.
Helpful. It's definitely one approach with two different angles, really, from a cyber and physical. So I think that paints the right picture on a very important topic. So we're approaching the last few minutes. I think we've covered as much ground as we can. As Mark said, I think we could probably definitely do a follow-up. So I'm going to hold both of you to a follow-up. Maybe going into the new year, we can look back and see exactly how much we got right, or did everything really go back to the way it was. So we may surprise ourselves into next year. But before we finish, I'd love to get your closing thoughts on the unique times we're living in. I'm sure listeners to this podcast are online a lot more than they thought they'd ever would be before, and I'm sure they were online a lot before that. So people are living lives, learning and consuming a lot online. Peter, you mentioned the human touch and the human contact, which I think a lot of people are still missing. There's a few reports around how even conferences and some business travel will surprise us in terms of the bounce back, because people really want to meet. Again, I'm probably a little bit more on your side around, I don't think as much as before, but it may well return. But just your parting thoughts, I guess, in terms of the current era we're in, and then a little, as much as you want to hold yourselves, what's your projection? Peter, do you think that 20% is gonna stay, or do you think we'll drop a little bit? And then what else do you think's on the horizon? And then over to you, Mark. So starting with you, Peter.
Yeah, it's of course. It's the $1 million question, right? And it's also when people ask you how you're doing, and personally, we're doing fine. At OM6, we actually have benefited from this whole situation, given the increased traffic, a number of upgrades, and what have you. Luckily, none of our people have fallen ill to the virus, so in that sense, we're actually doing fine, and quite positive also about the future when it comes to internet traffic and the services we provide. But that's all in a highly uncertain world. I'm convinced there's going to be quite an additional economic fallout still to happen. Many governments are putting all kinds of subsidies into the market to keep companies up and prevent them from falling over. And that cannot remain forever. So there is going to be a fallout. It's just unclear where that's going to happen. I think for the immediate future, things are looking good for companies like us, both digital and us. I think traffic will continue to grow. The acceleration of the digital transformation will continue, absolutely. But I think a little bit further away, all the debt that's now being built up by governments and the challenges we're seeing socially, economically, it's all making it highly uncertain. So we're positive, but also becoming more and more agile in the way we operate, so we can also deal with this uncertainty and respond to changing market demand. I think that's the best way I can describe where we are currently.
Excellent summary. And Mark, over to you for some parting thoughts from your perspective as well.
Well, it's so nice to follow Peter. He sums it up well. Yeah, I really can't add too much there. I think he's hitting a lot of the right notes. I guess I feel like I want to reemphasize kind of our real focus on the health and safety and well-being of all our stakeholders, our staff and our customers and whatnot continues to be a real area of focus, because we're clearly not out of this COVID-19, global pandemic yet, and it may be some time to come. Feel quite blessed, quite fortunate that we have this platform, that we're in this place where our business is seeing a lot of demand, and our services have effectively become an essential service for how the world is increasingly living their lives. And so that's very fortunate. But as Peter alluded to, not to be forgotten that many others are having a much more difficult time. And so keeping that in mind and stay focused on what we're doing and continuing to serve our customers and take care of our people.
I think that's as good a parting thought to end on as any. So leaves just for me to say, Peter, from AMSIX, thank you for your time, and thank you for your organization's support and input to the DigitalCentre community as well. Has been a lot of great contact over the months and years. And Mark, likewise, thanks for your time, and also for the Digital Realty perspective. With that, thank you to the listeners for taking the time out from I'm sure a call and email packed day for many of you who are listening. So appreciate you taking the time. You'll be able to see a lot of content on the DigitalCentre page where you click through to this podcast around both AMSIX and some of the key initiatives they're doing in the market, and also from Digital Realty, including the data gravity index and report that Mark alluded to. You'll be able to find on the DigitalCentre page, along with a lot of other content from both Digital and AMSIX and the other committee members. So with that, again, stay safe, stay well, and stay positive, and please do tune in to the next podcast. Thank you very much. Have a good day.